Good evening. Welcome to this launch event for two books published by Bloodaxe this month by two European poets. We've got Philip Gross, who I say is a European poet because his work is really drawing on a European imagination. He was born in England. His father was an Estonian refugee. And with him, we have Aleš Šteger. His book is his first UK publication, Burning Tongues, New and Selected Poems, wonderfully translated by Brian Henry. Philip's book is his 27th collection, and it's shortlisted for this year's T.S. Eliot Prize. Aleš is going to read first, and then we're going to have Philip, and then we'll have Aleš again, and then Philip. And then after that, we'll have a discussion between the two of them. And what's particularly exciting about these events is our poets have already read each other's books. So with the discussion, we get the very interesting thing where they can actually ask each other about their books and say what they like about them and really engage. And I think this will show that, very interestingly, the two poets we have tonight, although they're from totally different countries, different backgrounds, there's a lot of connections with their work. So I'd like to ask Aleš to start off.
Hello, Neil. Hello, everyone. It's a great joy to be with you tonight. It's Burning Tongues, the title of the book, which is a book of poems from over 20 years, coming from 6 different poetry collections of mine. So I'll jump a bit between forms and poems from individual collections. I'm going to start with a prose poem from a cyclus of prose poems from the Book of Bodies from 2005, because I think it corresponds very nicely with our theme, one probably of the themes that we're going to hear more about tonight from Philip, the Angels. The title is For Whom Do the Angels Play? For whom do the angels play? They're so skeptical of the self-aggrandizement of saints immersed in their wrongs and punishments in their path to God, the supreme autoeroticist and exhibitionist. Only Job, the patron saint of quivering lute strings and violin plucking, who suffered so successfully that now he can protect music and the muses, come close to him. Almost as naked as Bellini Signor in the Accademia in Venice. No difference between voice and body. Though Haydn plays his saxophone in the Hotel Europa Regina, strangeness spills from his mouth down the golden curse of the instrument. From afar it bites through skin and organs, appearing from the bones. It appears without puncturing anything, transforms the air into ecstasy, the reed, the voice, as if repositioning itself, pledging itself. Keys, reed, eyelids, voice, keys, mouth, voice. The streets are so narrow that two people meeting at the same time must exhale to slip by. Only the smell and the voice keep it all in check. Exhausted from wandering, we come for the 3rd time to the same campanile, a curving with no way out. Without shaking the mortar, a woman's voice penetrates the brick wall, a lonely melody, then a brief plucking of strings and the awakening of no one. The frequency by which the universe oscillates, now called by the contrabass. If I turned up the amplifier's volume a little, the membranes of the speakers would burst like the membrane of my right middle ear when I dove. The voices were calling me deeper, and there, at the bottom, lay a black box, perhaps an old transistor, a black hole that transmitted nothing, a passage where every melody, even angelic ones, disappears. The most horrifying moment, when I was 3 years old and first heard a recording of my own voice. I covered my ears and threw myself screaming to the ground. I was dissected like something turned inside out to the world. And the whole world, strangely dead, slipped into me. Neither veiling nor covering my eyes, my ears could prevent the violence of this act. I still hear its echo in me, keys, mouth, voice, keys, mouth, voice, keys, mouth, voice. The following couple of poems will be from the Book of Things. Basically, it's a book about things that are more than just objects. They can be much more than just objects. And it's an attempt of listening to the objects as they speak, listening to their proper voice. Egg. When you kill it at the edge of the pan, you don't notice that the egg grows an eye in death. It is so small, it doesn't satisfy even the most modest morning appetite. But it already watches, already stares at your world. What are its horizons, whose glossy-eyed perspectives? Does it see time, which moves carelessly through space, eyeballs, crack shells, chaos or order? Big questions for such a little eye at such an early hour. And you? Do you really want an answer? When you sit down eye to eye behind a table, you blind it soon enough with a crust of bread. I'm going to read this poem also in Slovenian, the language I'm writing my poems. Ko ga na robu ponve ubiješ, ne opaziš, da jajcu v smrti priraste oko. Tako drobno je, da ne poteši še tako skromnega jutranjega teka, a že zreje, že bolšči v ta tvoj svet. Kakšni so njegovi horizonti, srepenje čigavih perspektiv? Vidi čas, ki se ravnodušno seli skozi prostor, zrkla, počene lupine, kaos ali red? Velika vprašanja za tako drobno jajce ob tako rani uri. In ti res želiš odgovor? Ko sedeta iz oči v oči za mizo, ga s kruhovo skorjo še pravočasno oslepiš. All sorts of things talking this book of things, all sorts of things whose voices are becoming more and more clear. One of them is a hand dryer, on a petrol station in the middle of the night, alongside of a highway. Hand dryer. Who speaks when you're not speaking in your own name? When you do not pretend to speak in the name of another, but there is the presence of a voice like a ghost at a seance. Just retro larifari cadabra, aha, aha, blah, blah. It happens as if the wind would speak through you, as if Deborah speaks the Koshava, the Passat, Isis, Siberian winds. It happens invisible while speaking in a clear voice. And they do not happen, their returns bring no changes. Or indeed, somewhere between, where the living brush against the dead. Drops with which you have sprinkled their brow evaporate from your palms. Again, you press the silver button on the plastic box. Again, they come roaring, this time to warm your frigid fingers. Just abracadabra, aha, aha, blah, blah. Because they bring nothing new. The petrol station toilet is just like before. And you too were not changed. Only through your palms did something blow. You do not hold him, but sometimes he holds you. He has your lifelines, your handshake. He has no name, he who speaks when you do not speak in your name, and no home, and no things of his own, and no name without a body, always on the road. And his path can also be yours, but yours can never be his. I vividly remember a moment when the next poem came up to me. It was actually during a reading. We were sitting on the stage, and I was waiting for my turn, but then I saw there was a paper clip just on the floor in front of me, and it was so magic. I almost didn't react when they called me up. So Neil, we are lucky that there are no paper clips here on my desk in Ljubljana. Paper clip. You put down the paper confused. You only now notice the rusty imprint of a paper clip, a spiral sign for the way inward. She held together scraps of the world like an invisible thread. She warmed you, so enveloped in herself, like a fetus, like a snail, like a body in a mass grave. Her intention is not to add or take away from the world. Not a creator, the little paperclip. She only causes contact. Someone removed her. Who? Why? You do not know. Nor how many sheets were lost. With a finger, you go over the trace and start to read again. Before you opens a space within a space within a space within a space within a space. This poem has no end. I think that's for the first part. Thank you.
Thank you, Aleš. It was wonderful hearing you read in Slovenian as well as reading Brian's excellent translations into English. A lot of them read like they were written in English, but they're universal. I think that's part of what makes them so special. Now we'll turn to another very special poet, Philip Gross, who's going to read from the 13th Angel and make an angelic connection with your first point. Philip.
Thank you. It might not be angelic, but Aleš, at least I have a paperclip. What I love about readings like this is, however separate the poems were when they were written in the first place, in a setting like this, they are immediately in a conversation with each other. The Angel of Breath. The Angel of Breath pays you a visit every other second. Don't look for it outside. It has already entered you. Your pink and glistening cavities through the windpipe, through the branching bronchioles, as they frill out and spread, then fold back into themselves, the way the day-long haggling of a rookery will settle in the high trees for the night. The nearest you will come to wings. It comes and goes between you and the air, bringing back the good tidings that a body waits for. Oxygen, in the lingo of things, in other words, in rough translation, life. The angel visits. A voice can shudder awake, step to the body's window ledge, and briefly fly. I offer that as an opening, as a hint of what the angels in this book are or aren't. I'm almost more interested in what the angels aren't than what they are. I'm not writing this out of any belief in angels. It feels more important than that. I certainly never planned to write a book of angels. I think I haven't, because the angels aren't what it's about. The angels, if they're there, are a way of seeing. Think of it as a kind of low-flying overview that still can't stop caring about the details, however unimportant, and especially if unimportant they seem to us. For the rest of this first block, I'll read extracts out of a sequence which was a gift of a family circumstance that left my wife and I minding an empty flat in East London for a month in a time just before COVID. And the sequence is called Nocturne, the Information. Night, wired and ticking. Not a wink is not electric, sign to sign, the shut shops half sleep, street lights under their hoods, street time moving in jolts, red, amber, green, and the cold blush of blue on a cheek. Stranger, her mobile tingling with presence, passing. Voices quick-timed between nodes of light. On a tide mark of light, the road beyond the park, at intervals, the dim stacked blocks of pixels that are buses, homebound. Faces, bits and bytes in them, reprogrammed, stop by stop. We are the information. Bin lorry, police car, bus, their roofs are coded for the sky to read. And me, from here, a live flow diagram, the pulse of us. Bank holiday heat stokes up the street sound, windows open, people expanding to beyond the borders of their bodies, We are too much to take in. The night air, a relish of spice and charred meat, burger, best kebabs in London, roti, jukpa, Caribbean takeaway. We're all-night taxi, never quite the last bus. We're too much to fit into the livelong day. A place that's a perch on the tingling wires of connection. See the tube map, the overground, ghosted in like lymph among the bloodstream. Bus routes clustered to a node here. Now, overlay the map of shadows. Show what slammed door night flit, what mist foothold or chill current in a track-marked vein leads here, under the bridge, washed up on cardboard. What darkening flood. Above, dull gunfire. In the iron-girded cave, all day dark and always dripping. One of the newspaper nests is empty. In that absence, people have left gifts, apple, orange, a granola bar, health food. To make a votive offering to the borderline departed, that's one thing. Another to pass it hand to hand, eye to eye, with one of the shades. Out of body, of the body of the city. Not soaring, just 3 stories, more the low swoop of an angel, or the shite hawk kites street sweeping London in an age of plague. Come midnight, the delivery truck is below, rattling its cages, orange hazard flashes twitching to and fro. It is feeding the shop. Our sudden appetites at all hours want it now. 1 story down, across the street, another cast of lives. Grey, blue and flickering, the in-house twilight of TV. Thin curtains, half fastened, as he is shrugged out on the sofa, undone from his day self. Anyone. Her face, from this hard angle, never seen. Snooper, stalker, spook, fly on the wall, Passover angel. We are abjected by surveillance, the seer as much as the seen. All this, the perceptible city tingling, now isn't the time for I sing the body electric ecstasies, sing the body that's weary, sleepless and a little scuffed at 3 a.m. and afloat in the long view above dark scrubland, dark marshes, no city at all except for electricity. Lights on the surface like will-o'-the-wisps, sing simultaneity. All this, all together in the eyes of, let's not go as far as God, but the quiet angels of the internet, not the glitter sprites of data, but the patient pools of space between, the shade of a palm tree in deserts of digital light. They watch, with no message for us, who are too much the message already. Simply presence with us, simply listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Philip. Now we're going to hear from Aleš again. And the back of his book, I don't know if you can see this, is this image of Aleš divided in 2. And I think in a way, when we hear Aleš reading his poems in English, we're hearing 2 voices, because we're hearing the Slovenian poem behind the poem in English translated by Brian Henry. And that's perhaps something we can say something about in the discussion at the end. So I'd now like to introduce Aleš to come back.
gnashing teeth. Esteemed doctor of culture, birds fly beneath the roots. Computers are sweating, at the poles holes grow, and deaf-mute people rush from inside them to scrape the sclera and shame from our eyes. Our names are proteins. We are happy when we burn them, cherished doctor, internationally ill expert of the manufacture of souls. Without a doubt, we are dialogic. Whoever doubts goes in the pit. Whoever doesn't doubt goes the only way. No doctrines. The time of salvation is already breathing down a dirty neck. The day arrives like a poem in a lost language. A barefoot girl is pricked by a forgotten word and gnashes her teeth. These are now poems from my latest 2-3 poetry collections. With some of them, I also sometimes, how shall I say, I'm trying with in a dialogue with a musician, a friend of mine, an accordion player, I try to address some public, and usually we start with this poem. It's a question not only to the list, to those who listen, but also to permanently to myself. What are our poets smiling at? What are our poets smiling at? There's nothing funny in our tribe. Many lie murdered in galleys. Our women and children are hungry and barefoot. Unknown illnesses are mowing us down. No new villages built, and soon it will snow. Despite all this, the smiles don't fade from the poets' faces, as if facing sorrow brings them irrational, secret joy. When we ask them, what's so funny? They silently shrug and do the same when we demand they cheer us up in these dark times. They guard the reason for their smiling just for their own enjoyment. We trust them less and less, believe their sparse words less and less. The smiles of our poets are truly mysterious in these poor times. Did their minds burn out? Do they mock our common misery? Their smiling sometimes cuts more cruelly than the weapons of our enemies. But they are wrong if they think that they will deceive us. We will kill our poets only when we squeeze their secret out of them. We will leave alive only the biggest blatherers, somber-faced and resembling us. From where I live in Ljubljana, the most beautiful view is the main road facing towards north. It's a long, straight road, and you can see in the background the alpine peaks covered with snow. It's like an open invitation always when one looks towards these mountains, as if something would be asking me, why are you here? Why don't you immediately start walking towards these mountains? Mountain. This mountain does and does not have a name. It has a name that persistently evades. Not a name, only a mute crease of yet another everyday loss. In vain you address the clearing of pines. In vain the black stomachs of clouds. The name of the mountain persistently evades, teaches you without purpose, without cause, to seek, to call, to shout, to despair, to toy with despair. Mountain, mountain, mountain in front of me. Scree, scree, scree inside. Inside where there are many broken shadows, a lot of scree, but no trees. From the scree, a silent rock grows. From the silent rock, a solid mountain. This mountain does and does not have a name. It has a name that persistently evades. A mountain, mountain, mountain in me. Scree, scree, scree everywhere. Above the sky, beneath the earth. Shall I fall into the gray sky? Into the pale stroke in the gray, into the trace that behind a feeling reveals that it does not exist, and though will return? Shall I fall, vanish into the in-between like a mouse into the night flower, sleepless, and never awaken except in letters? Shall I fall and leave? Because I love returning, because I am above the sky, beneath the earth, forever. What is half an hour if everything is halved? An apple, a life, and the path seen only by you? Half a little bird flies by, and half a memory appears in the souls, and half a mother and father. I learn to lose, and in loss to call forth the lost with a blind word. A poem cannot do any more. To fall where the power that gradually heals its own wound appears. Do you know it, love? And to conclude, 5 assertions. I'll do it alternately in both languages. 5 assertions. This is all the years have washed up. 5 trditev, to je vse, kar so naplavila leta. First, I loved you even before I existed. Prva, ljubil sem te še preden sem obstajal. Second, my life is a drop of blank ink in the boundless night. Druga, moje življenje je kaplja črnila v brezmejno noč. Third, there is no end, only snow-covered mountain peaks. Tretja, ni konca, le zasneženi vrhovi gora. Fourth, the sea doesn't care about us. Četrta, morje se ne meni za nas. Zadnja, ni konca, le ledeniki umirajo. And the last, there is no end. Only glaciers are dying. Thank you.
Thank you, Aleš. And now welcome Philip to come back for his second set. Just to say, Philip is muted at the moment, so I'll just have to ask him to unmute.
Thank you. I feel envious and admiring of those beautifully segued two languages I'm hearing, and I wish I had some equivalent to offer back, Aleš. It feels though there is another language, but behind all these words I write, but it wouldn't come over online because it's probably silence. Discuss. No. The book I'm bearing now, just as it didn't intend to be a book about angels, it certainly didn't intend to be a book about its moment in time either. But COVID happened, and it did that curious juggling between distance and closeness, and it was as though a lens was changing in the air around us. So what was far was near, and vice versa. And in a sense, it changed the things I'd been looking at immediately before it as well. I suspect, anyway, that the best writing about the moments we're in happens not when you're intending to do it, but when it happens to us. It's not how we see the world around us, but how the world around us changes and sees us. This is in the light of the times. In the light of the times, as when a low sun undercuts the cloud mass, startling the house fronts opposite too bright against its slate blue-grey, like stage flats, operatic, slightly shuddering. In the light that's no light we can see, infrared that conjures us as heat ghosts, the body's visible unconscious, our pulsing life warmth in the underdark, leaving touch tracks and smears as we fade. In light that's more like darkness, like the shriveling cool gaze of X-rays staring through the soft and moist, going straight for the nub of us, tissues recomposing, growth, decay. In the light of the facts, in which we ebb and eddy, nodes of data, a digital balance unknown to ourselves. So we troop through the sidelines of plague. Old Totentant says, "Look, my lords, the merry dancing bones." What I will read next are 4 of the 13 angels who come out relatively in the open before the end of a book in which they have anyway been hiding in the cracks and crevices and metaphors all the way through. If angels classically are messengers, I've no wish to say or even know what message these bear. And again, I think it's probably better if we don't know this completely. So, various of those angels. A glassy thing. A glassy thing, an angel, quite see-through, exquisitely ground, like a lens, What you see is not in it, but through it, world refracted, clarified. Follow it now, down the street, cut left behind the pound shop. Here it speaks in sprayed tags. Up the fire escape, here on the long concrete landing. Here gazing out at the view, roofs, roofs. Here magnifying the small change of a life held up to catch the gift of light. Or it throws us into long perspective without warning. We grow microscopic. Or it climbs inside the mirror and looks back at you. Don't try to clutch it. It might shatter, and the splinters of it cut you to the quick. The angel of the slight and almost, of the least rank, below the dominions, the powers, the thrones, the nuances, the angels of fine-tuning, of each any moment in its balancing along the bridge of one hair, one petal, oyster pink, tipped from the climbing rose to fall under mere weight of sunlight. The melt of one snowflake that begins the avalanche. The most quietly militant of angels, in their minute, near imperceptible rebuttal of the brag and bray of big simplicity, its marching orders. Angel of the caught breath, of the comma, or the careful line break, or small word, barely bearing a meaning that marks, that makes a change in the momentum of the world. Who'd have thought the debris of those unregarded lives, the words choked in their throats, their fluent silences bricked in by noise, could constitute an angel. But look at the stress lines spreading through the concrete at your feet. Cracks feathering, flexing, dust flakes crumbling as it rises. The crackling sound as it fills out its wings. The first downbeat is clumsy. It gathers its mass, bundled armfuls of flight, and flings it. The horizons shudder like the tacky backdrop we half knew they were. It clears its throat like white noise, like a waterfall, like wind. And the last one, I'll end with the 13th Angel, which gives its name, after all, to the book. Not so much the uninvited at the christening as the one there are no words for in the language, not even a space in the air. Say my name, says the nothing, but day upon day rushes in, the lax seems to be filled, and yet. Try to speak, you taste it, the shock of animal intimations, something rotting in the roadside thicket, bad news, the stink that has a sweetness on its breath. Feel the weight of humidity here inside you, like a rain cloud on the X-ray, on the conscience, in the small hours, in the margins of the soul. In 50 years, too late for you, this will all seem so clear. The 13th Angel will have written the page on which you're a name, or less, a hyperlink that clicks into the mist. Today, though, it's here. It's silence, like a gift for something raw, pink, crying, oh, unreasonably into being. And the 13th angel is the world itself.
Thank you, Philip.
Yeah.
We're now going to go into a discussion mode. And whilst we're just moving the screen so that you can see all of us, just like to remind our audience watching that if you want to order the books, just scroll down on the YouTube page and you'll find links to order both the 13th Angel and Burning Tongues. So I hope you'll do that. So are we all now together? I'll just move into gallery. Yes, we're together. So I'll start off with Aleš. Aleš, you were born in 1973 in Puli in Slovenia, and you grew up under Tito's communist rule when it was Yugoslavia, not Slovenia. And at 18, I think it was, the Slovenia became an independent country in its own right. And within 3 or 4 years, you published your first collection. So that was a real kind of waking up. And I was wondering whether you could say something about how that shift in the country, the culture, everything that was going on affected you in becoming a poet and publishing your work and getting your work out there.
How shall I say, Yugoslavia, at least in the 80s, and prior to this, it was, among other things, and without idealizing now, it was a culture, it was a very rich culture. It was also a country of books, partly, of course, also of dissidents. But the 80s, which I vividly remember, were an extremely enthusiastic, lively time, where on the one side, political, breakup was more and more visibly everywhere. On the other side, many movements were parallelly happening, giving faith to people that a better future is possible. So I feel privileged to have lived under a different political system in times which were revolutionary, and also now from a distance of 30 years, being able to say what was also good and bad in this old system. After the breakup, soon I think Slovenians had to face the reality that we as a society were extremely young and experienced, and we had to build up institutions, had to find ways, also our own ways, not only copying whatever, let's say, countries with a longer democratic legacy had to say to us. On the level of poetry, it was an extremely interesting, diverse time, because there was this enthusiasm. Everyone was trying to move freely around and to experience new stuff. There were really big names, important poets among us at that time. Two I have to mention at least: Tomáš Šalamun and Dane Zajíc, really two major European poets. Šalamun, who has been at that time perhaps one of the most translated poets in the US, and Zajíc, who was, Ted Hughes was apparently extremely surprised and struck when he read Zajíc's poetry in the magazine Poetry in Translation in the 70s for the first time, because they saw that there is someone behind the Iron Curtain who at that time was writing poetry very similar to his, animal poems. So I think there were great treasures among us, and we sometimes we even didn't recognize what we have. Now, of course, times are changing, and how shall I say, poetry still plays a major role in our society. Partly, I think, also due to the fact that we are not that many, and it's impossible to avoid poets and poetry.
Right, thank you, Aleš. Philip, I'll turn to you now. I was very surprised when you sent me the manuscript for the 13th Angel, because I'd never taken you for a poet who wrote about the city. Your previous books have related to things like water, language, love, the self, aging, dementia, but not the city. But what you talked about as the gift of being in that flat seemed to have opened up a whole new way of looking at the world in your work. I was rather reminded of the film Wings of Desire, also in relation to the way you were looking down on the city and what you saw. I was wondering whether you could say something about that.
I think if I was placing my angels anywhere, it would be somewhere halfway between Wim Wenders's angels, who are tender but kind of tragic onlookers. It'd be halfway between that and the much more playful thing that angels became for Paul Klee at the end of his life, when he effectively just doodled hundreds of them, which are strangely human and entirely on the intersection between our lives and whichever other way there is of seeing it. There was something about spending those weeks in a rather kind of stripped bare way in Finsbury Park, that it wasn't like being a visitor, it wasn't like being a tourist at all, but it wasn't quite like being an inhabitant either. And it was a gift of a kind of foreignness. And I was thinking, listening to Aleš talking about Slovenia there and relationships with the outside world, there is a kind of silent part of my life which has always been foreignness, in that my father came to the UK from Estonia as a wartime refugee. I didn't grow up knowing his culture. I didn't hear him speak his language till I was well in my 30s. But I knew that other was there, and I think I've responded to being put in a place which isn't entirely at home. Now, for the last almost 20 years now, I've lived in Wales, where I both, I feel as though I've been somewhat embraced here, and it both is and it isn't home. And that month in London was another kind of homemaking, but not at homeness. And maybe all of those are calling back echoes of my father's state of being here and being elsewhere at the same time, or bringing a bit of eye-opening otherness with him.
Did the Angel's poem come later? I mean, you started off, the book starts with the nocturne information, where you're looking down on the city from on high.
Yes.
Night. Did the Angel's poem come after that?
Yes, they were what gathered in what I was only then realizing was a book. I do have a habit of sending you, Neil, books which everyone assumed must have been sort of concept albums and hatched like that in the start, and they never are. You know, there were plenty of other things I could also have picked out of my notebook as well, but there are sort of gravitational clumps of things which start being in relationship with each other. And it was realizing how many darn angels there were, kind of perching in poem after poem, you know, usually just as passing references or metaphors or even jokes, but thinking, actually, the angels have this book. And really that's when the final 13 turned up. So they were almost there to gather the other poems in and say, okay, there's a conversation going on here. What do you think it's saying?
Aleš, your poems in a way are investigations, and I think Philip's are too. And I wonder whether you could say something about that, and maybe you could also address each other and ask each other questions about your books and say things to each other that you've picked up on each other's books.
Deliberately from the start, I try to write, how shall I say, not try, but the process of another book of poetry beginning to evolve is with losing one's language. So I refer very much to this feeling of the foreigner, because I feel a foreigner to myself, to my whatever I consider to be my language at a certain moment. So there comes always this not one, many moments of complete incapability and impossibility, basically, to pronounce, to speak out, to say whatever, and the language basically dissolves. And then it can take sometimes years before something else comes up. There was a time, and I think perhaps even in this book, which is really, as I mentioned before, a selection out of over 20 years of work, there came a moment where I thought there is no sense write more, basically, to go on with writing, and I was fine with it, basically. But then after, I don't know, 1.5 years, 2 years, a new tone or verses, phrases start to appear which were so disturbing and didn't want to let me go, so that I had to let go and to see, I mean, start writing and seeing what will happen. It's always a discovery of the unknown, of course. It's no plan, as Philip said, no plan, although this discovery is always also a discovery of some kind of plan that was prior invisible to one. So it's like a blind, I mean, a map that doesn't exist, and you have to somehow, with all the errors and mistakes, you have to navigate. It's funny that Neil, you mentioned Wings of Desire, because I had Wender's movie also in my head, and I mean many other things, reading this really extraordinary book of Philip's. I was also I had to think about Alberti's book about angels. Rafael Alberti, it was a major book for the Latin American poetic traditions, first half of the century, which is basically from first to last page about angels. Here it's much more loosely set, I think. But and I just a couple of months ago I was in Basel, and looking at Klee's angels, it made me, I mean, it was like, you know, revisiting some of the just images that stuck to my head. When Walter Benjamin describes the angel of history, he points him basically with the shoulders facing the future. That means he sees the destruction that is happening behind, in the past, but the look doesn't go into the future. So it's a kind of dehistorization basically happening in the angelic look. And this look permits basically a completely fresh look of someone who was as a newborn set in a world that reveals basically all the secrets to one. And that was this notion of also of dehistorization in a positive sense that's present here, because one in your poems, Philip, as I read them, because one can really sense the notion of wonder behind small urban things, which we lose immediately when we set ourselves in any kind of known contexts. And history is a very strong context that defines us so much that as a poet we have to escape, we have to break out somehow. We can't stay with what the world prepared for us.
I was immediately aware of both of us being intensely drawn to small, perhaps fragmentary or ordinary things, and as being really worthwhile listening to, as though they had a voice. You know, I was just excited finding out that you name an entire book, the book of things. And just make that an act of faith, that if you look at anything that's ordinary enough and listen, you know, you'll find out what you need to find out. Because one of the things I've done over the years is teach, in some ways, creative writing, and people can get very anxious to go out in the world and find interesting subjects. And normally my instinct is actually, if the subject needs to find you, it will find you. Don't go on the internet and look for it. Find the most unremarkable thing you can find. A small stone in the back garden, and just look at it for long enough, and you know it will disclose what you need to find out next. But if I can just quickly pick up also on what you said, Aleš, about losing your voice on your way perhaps to the next voice finding you. There is so much talked about emerging poets kind of working to find their voice, and I'm always nervous of that discourse. And so, you know, the moment you think you know what your voice is, put your fingers in your ear and run away going la 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 la. You know?
I mean, it's unavoidable to have unavoidable voices and words and hearings in one's process. So there are certain things you cannot avoid, and the big mystery is why this, why not something else, why in that way, why not in another. And it remains a mystery also after we have written all our books. And I mean, but still there, this notion that there is such a powerful force that is in the universe around us, and we are just a part of it. But we can speak somehow. We can communicate, and it can be communicated through our words. It's a big discovery, because when one raises a child, you try to make them a strong person, a strong individual, ego. Everything wrong. From a point of view of a poem or act of art, ego is the most, I think, dangerous. Trusting an ego, it's basically suicidal suicidal device, basically, because it's not what is it all about. And when you look through this trap, basically, small details become as important as, I mean, big things things that we used to call big and important. Cracks in the asphalt or street lights become as important as the tube system of London.
Yes. Yes. I think you are absolutely right to bring in that one of Clay's angels and Benjamin's reading of it as the angel being blown backwards into some unknown future by a kind of explosion of the whole of history. And I've always imagined that the fragments of that history disconnected from each other and the narratives they thought they were in are being whirled backwards by the blast with him. Thinking about kind of writing it in the age we are, which is tending to become an extremely committed, which is good, activist, which is probably good, opinionated, which is maybe not so good age. I certainly noticed you, Aleš, being intrigued by things which come to you as if with a message, but the message in the end is they don't quite disclose it in a way that you can unpack in words, and that is their virtue, that's their fascination, and maybe more and more in the later poems in the book. It feels as though you are fashioning these quite tight gnomic kind of images and lines, which people are meant to spend quite a long while with, or just let them lodge in their head, and they will gradually disclose meanings. But are we in the wrong age, or are we in exactly the right age? If our first instinct is not to pass on a message, but to pass on these questions?
Probably people who are not coming with a defined, easily readable message are always wrong. They're always out of time. For people like us, I think the only way is to say this is our time, and there is no other time than this time. Although it's a hallucinatory, transformative experience. I mean, when I was born, people were imprisoned because they were owning a book.
Mm.
And now, you know, a book has almost no value to the majority of people. I mean, these are major changes happening, and we see it also in the, how shall I say, secluded world of poetry, that quite a big chunk of it tries really to deliver a message that is being expected by a certain community, which is okay, but it's just not what I'm personally interested in. I think I feel extreme gratitude to be able to participate in the unknown. And how can I then deliver a message? I mean, you know, angels are messengers, but they come with how shall I say, with a breath that speaks with many languages and tongues at the same time.
Yes. Yes. I like that. Except that it is a message, but you might not know which language it's in.
Yes.
Yeah.
And you mentioned silence before, which I think it's a, and there is of course a silence behind the silence. So it's how shall I say, there is becoming a messenger between the silence and the silence behind the silence is a wonderful objective with someone who deals with words.
Yes. Lovely. And of course, we know, I mean, anyone who's lived in the more eastern end of Europe knows that there are also experiences of being silenced, which is not the same thing as the silence we're talking about at all. It's almost as though that kind of fundamental generative silence needs to be reintroduced into the world, so it's not confused with the oppressive kind, which is a silencing.
I remember talking to a prisoner who has been a political prisoner who has been in single confinement for many years, and of course he said the only thing that saved him was language of his head. When he saw that no one could stripe him of these, they took everything he had, his freedom, his possibility to move around, everything, but they couldn't take this. So there are of course things, different way of silence to be addressed when this is needed, but we as a civilization, I have to say, we are in need to address many issues, and I mean the silence we are talking now about, which is not this silence of this prisoner, but another silence, is always there, and we have somehow not we have to not, perhaps it's not a responsibility, but I feel great joy in doing it. To keep it somehow as part of what I'm doing.
Okay, yes.
Well,
Over
thank
the
you.
last 40 odd years, I've visited and done writing work in schools quite often, and it definitely is harder now to walk into a classroom of young people and say, just close your eyes and go inside your head. You're much more likely now for people to just stare at you and say, what do you mean inside? You know, because a fine thing as it is that often young people have learned to express themselves more freely in outward ways. It might be that the endangered thing now is the kind of art and resource of inwardness. You know, that actually is it's everybody's birthright. And of course, in the way that prisoner knew, you know, he could be imprisoned, but he still had his inwardness. So we need people whose job it'll be to make sure that is kept at least in the seed bank of the culture. You know, just because sure as heck the world will need it again in the future. So you know, it needs to be preserved and nurtured somewhere, even if not everybody wants it at the moment.
Well, I need to butt in there because we could be talking all night, but we have to draw the event to a close. So I have to silence our poets now and thank them both for excellent discussion, excellent readings. And Aleš mentioned the Paul Klee Museum at Basel, where the angels are shown, where his angel pictures can be seen. And Philip talked about inspiring poets to write. And I would say, so I've been there to that amazing museum, which is totally devoted to Klee's work. Go to a place like that and just be inspired, because it really is amazing. So thank you for taking part, and thank you, audience, for watching tonight. Thanks very much.
Thank you all.
Thank you for this wonderful conversation, Philip. Thank you, Neil.
Thank you.